Genoa City was rocked by a revelation that no one saw coming. The drama began quietly but quickly escalated into one of the most explosive confrontations the Newman family had faced in years. For weeks, tension had been building around Phyllis Summers, whose behavior had become increasingly erratic and secretive. Friends noticed the sudden phone calls she would step outside to answer, the hushed conversations, and the way she seemed to be watching everyone closely. At first, many assumed Phyllis was simply plotting one of her usual schemes. After all, manipulation and ambition had always been part of her reputation in Genoa City. But no one suspected the truth would be far more shocking. The person who finally began connecting the dots was Amanda Sinclair, a sharp legal mind who had quietly returned to town and started reviewing a series of suspicious transactions linked to Newman Enterprises. As a respected attorney, Amanda was accustomed to following evidence wherever it led, but even she was stunned when the trail pointed directly toward Phyllis. Amanda's investigation started when she noticed irregular financial transfers moving through several shell accounts. These weren't ordinary corporate transactions. They were carefully disguised payments routed through overseas servers and hidden behind multiple corporate fronts. The deeper Amanda dug, the more one name kept surfacing in connection with the accounts: Phyllis Summers. At first Amanda wondered if it was a mistake. After all, Phyllis had many enemies, and framing her wouldn't be impossible. But the evidence continued piling up. Amanda discovered encrypted messages that suggested someone inside Genoa City had been secretly feeding information about Newman family business dealings to an outside party. The idea of corporate espionage was alarming enough, but when Amanda uncovered the second secret, one that directly involved a dangerous criminal from the past, she realized the situation was far bigger than financial sabotage. Determined to reveal the truth, Amanda began gathering documents, screenshots, bank records, and testimony from a few reluctant witnesses who had seen Phyllis meeting mysterious contacts late at night. Meanwhile, life in Genoa City continued as usual on the surface. At the Newman ranch, Victor Newman remained focused on protecting his family and maintaining control over his powerful business empire. Victor had faced countless betrayals over the years, but he trusted that his inner circle remained loyal. Nikki Newman sensed tension brewing but couldn't quite identify the source. Their children, Nick Newman and Victoria Newman, were preoccupied with business conflicts and personal struggles. No one realized that a storm was about to hit their family. The only person who suspected trouble was Jack Abbott, who had known Phyllis long enough to recognize when she was hiding something. Jack had confronted her more than once about her strange behavior, but Phyllis brushed him off with confident smiles and vague explanations. She insisted she was simply working on a business opportunity that could benefit everyone. Jack wanted to believe her, but something in his gut told him that the truth was darker. The moment of reckoning arrived when Amanda requested a formal meeting with the Newman family. She insisted it was urgent and that everyone needed to hear what she had discovered. Victor initially resisted. He didn't like being summoned or pressured, but Amanda's tone made it clear the matter was serious. Soon, several of Genoa City's most powerful figures gathered in the Newman living room. Victor sat at the center, his presence commanding the room, while Nikki stood beside him with quiet concern. Nick and Victoria exchanged puzzled glances. Jack Abbott had been invited as well, which only deepened the mystery. And then there was Phyllis, who arrived late, looking confident but slightly on edge. She scanned the room quickly, her eyes narrowing when she saw Amanda standing beside a folder filled with documents. Amanda wasted no time getting to the point. Calm but firm, she explained that she had uncovered evidence of a major security breach involving Newman Enterprises. Victor's expression hardened instantly. Corporate sabotage was something he took very seriously. Amanda then revealed the first secret. Someone had been secretly funneling sensitive business information to an outside competitor, using hidden financial accounts to receive payment. Gasps filled the room as Amanda projected the financial records on a screen. At first the information looked like a confusing web of numbers and transfers. But as Amanda highlighted specific details, a pattern became clear. Every transaction ultimately connected back to one person, Phyllis Summers. The room fell into stunned silence. Phyllis immediately jumped to her feet, denying the accusation. She laughed sarcastically, claiming Amanda's evidence was fabricated. But Amanda remained composed. She presented more proof, emails, timestamps, and surveillance footage showing Phyllis meeting with a representative from a rival corporation. Nick stared at Phyllis in disbelief, struggling to reconcile the woman he knew with the traitor Amanda was describing. Nikki shook her head slowly, hurt and disappointed. Victor, however, said nothing. His eyes were fixed on Phyllis with a cold intensity that made the room feel even more tense. Just when it seemed the situation couldn't get worse, Amanda revealed the second secret. According to her investigation, Phyllis hadn't just been selling corporate information, she had also been secretly communicating with a dangerous figure from Genoa City's past. Amanda displayed another set of records showing encrypted messages between Phyllis and a mysterious contact. As the messages were decoded, the name of the recipient sent shockwaves through the room: Matt Clark. Matt Clark had long been associated with violence, manipulation, and chaos. The idea that Phyllis had been collaborating with him was almost impossible to believe. This revelation pushed the Newman family to the edge. Nick demanded answers, his voice shaking with anger. Victoria accused Phyllis of endangering everyone in Genoa City. Nikki looked heartbroken, recalling all the time she had tried to trust Phyllis despite their complicated history. Jack Abbott, who had always defended Phyllis even during her worst mistakes, felt a crushing sense of betrayal. But the most intimidating reaction came from Victor Newman. Slowly rising from his chair, Victor confronted Phyllis directly. His voice was quiet but filled with unmistakable authority. He demanded to know why she had betrayed the Newman family. For a moment, Phyllis tried to maintain her defiance. She insisted Amanda was twisting the facts and that the situation wasn't what it seemed. But as more evidence appeared on the screen, her confidence began to crumble. Amanda revealed the final piece of proof, a recorded phone call in which Phyllis discussed using Newman's secrets as leverage to secure her own power in Genoa City. When the recording ended, the truth could no longer be denied. Phyllis had been caught. The aftermath was explosive. Nick shouted in frustration, accusing Phyllis of destroying what little trust remained between them. Victoria declared that Phyllis should never be allowed near Newman business again. Nikki turned away, unable to even look at her. Jack confronted Phyllis with a mixture of anger and sadness, asking how she could sink so low. Phyllis attempted one last defense, claiming she had been desperate and that everything she did was meant to protect herself. But the excuses fell flat. The damage was already done. Victor made the final decision. With cold precision, he announced that Phyllis was no longer welcome in any Newman operation, partnership, or family event. He warned her that if she attempted to interfere with the Newmans again, he would use every resource at his disposal to stop her. The message was clear. Phyllis had been forced out of their world. As Phyllis stood alone in the center of the room, the reality of her situation finally hit her. The allies she once relied on had turned away, and the power she sought had slipped through her fingers. Amanda closed her folder quietly, knowing that justice had been served. But she also understood that in Genoa City, consequences rarely mark the end of the story, they often mark the beginning of something even bigger. And as Phyllis walked out of the Newman mansion that night, one thing was certain. The fallout from Amanda's stunning revelation would ripple across Genoa City for weeks to come, leaving broken alliances, new rivalries, and the lingering question of whether Phyllis Summers was truly defeated, or already planning her next move. The fallout from Amanda's stunning revelation continued to ripple through the young and the restless, leaving Genoa City buzzing with shock, anger, and uncertainty. As the door to the Newman mansion slammed shut behind Phyllis Summers, the silence inside the room felt almost suffocating. Everyone remained frozen in place for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The woman who had once maneuvered her way through Genoa City with fierce confidence had just been exposed in front of the most powerful family in town, and the consequences were only beginning. At the center of the room stood Victor Newman, his expression unreadable but his mind clearly working through the implications of the betrayal. Victor had built his empire by anticipating enemies and eliminating threats before they could grow too powerful. But Phyllis had been inside the circle, someone who had spent years around his family, someone who had shared drinks, conversations, and moments of uneasy alliances. The idea that she had been secretly leaking information and communicating with a dangerous criminal like Matt Clark was not just infuriating, it was a direct attack on everything Victor had spent decades building. "Everyone stay calm," Victor finally said in his deep, commanding voice. But calm was the last thing anyone in the room felt. Nick Newman paced across the living room, running a hand through his hair as frustration and disbelief battled within him. Nick had known Phyllis for years. Their relationship had gone through countless ups and downs, betrayals and reconciliations, but a part of him had always believed she cared about their family in her own complicated way. Seeing the evidence laid out by Amanda Sinclair shattered that belief. "I don't get it," Nick muttered. "Why would she do something like this? What did she think she was going to gain?" Nearby, Nikki Newman sat slowly on the couch, her expression filled with disappointment. Nikki had never fully trusted Phyllis, but she had hoped that over time the fiery redhead had matured and learned from her past mistakes. Instead, the revelation proved that Phyllis had been playing a dangerous game behind everyone's backs. "I should have known," Nikki said quietly. "Phyllis has always believed the rules don't apply to her." Standing by the fireplace, Victoria Newman folded her arms tightly. Her anger was more controlled than Nick's, but it burned just as intensely. "This isn't just about betrayal," Victoria said sharply. "She put our entire company at risk. If our competitors got access to confidential information, it could have cost us millions, maybe more." Amanda nodded slightly, confirming the seriousness of the situation. "The financial damage is still being analyzed," Amanda explained. "But the bigger issue is how much information was passed along and how long it's been happening." Victor turned toward Amanda, studying her carefully. Despite the explosive nature of her revelation, Amanda remained calm and professional. "You've done the Newman family a service," Victor said firmly. "But this matter is far from finished." Amanda understood exactly what Victor meant. In Genoa City, exposure was only the first step. Consequences always followed. Meanwhile, across town, Phyllis was driving through the dark streets with white-knuckled intensity gripping the steering wheel. Her mind was racing as anger, humiliation, and panic collided inside her. The confrontation at the Newman mansion replayed over and over in her head. Amanda's calm voice. The stunned faces. Victor's cold dismissal. Phyllis had always prided herself on being the smartest person in the room. She had survived countless scandals, rivalries, and schemes. But tonight was different. Tonight, she had been cornered. She pulled her car into the parking lot of Crimson Lights, the familiar coffeehouse that had served as a gathering place for Genoa City residents for years. Normally it was bustling with conversations and laughter, but at this late hour the cafe was quiet. Phyllis stepped inside, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Behind the counter, Sharon Newman looked up with surprise. "Phyllis," Sharon said cautiously. The tension between the two women had a long history, filled with rivalry and resentment. But tonight, Sharon could immediately tell something was wrong. "You look like you just walked out of a hurricane." Phyllis forced a tight smile as she sat down at the counter. "You could say that." Sharon poured a cup of coffee and placed it in front of her. "What happened?" Phyllis stared into the dark liquid for a moment before answering. "Amanda Sinclair happened." Sharon's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That bad?" Phyllis let out a bitter laugh. "Worse. She exposed everything." Sharon said nothing for a moment, absorbing the weight of that statement. "Everything, meaning?" Phyllis leaned back in the chair, crossing her arms defensively. "The financial transfers, the information leaks, and my contact with Matt Clark." Sharon's eyes widened. "You were actually working with him?" Phyllis quickly snapped back. "Not working with him, communicating. There's a difference." But Sharon's expression made it clear she didn't see much distinction. "Phyllis, that's dangerous. Matt Clark isn't someone you just communicate with." Phyllis knew that better than anyone. But desperation had pushed her into risky territory. Back at the Newman ranch, the discussion was far from over. Victor had gathered his family and Amanda around the large conference table in his study. Papers and digital reports covered the surface as they began analyzing the full scope of Phyllis's actions. "We need to identify every leak," Victor said. "Every message, every transaction." Nick sighed heavily. "I still can't believe she was talking to Matt Clark." Amanda nodded. "You should have never looked there." The more she thought about it, the more certain she became of one thing. Whatever secret Phyllis was hiding, it was far bigger than a simple financial scheme. And sooner or later, the truth would explode. When it did, the fallout wouldn't just affect Phyllis. It would shake the entire city. This evening settled over Genoa City. The streets outside crimson lights were washed in the amber glow of street lamps and the fading warmth of sunset. Yet for Tessa Porter, the world felt colder than usual. She stepped onto the sidewalk with slow, measured steps, still feeling the faint sting of the slap from Phyllis Summers. But the physical pain had already faded. What lingered was the deeper shock of everything she had just witnessed. Tessa had always tried to keep her life relatively calm compared to the constant drama that swirled around Genoa City's most powerful families. She focused on her music, her relationship with Mariah Copeland, and building a future that felt stable and honest. Yet somehow, without intending to, she had just stumbled directly into a dangerous secret that might involve the most powerful name in town, Victor Newman. Back inside the cafe, Phyllis remained frozen for several seconds after Tessa left. The tension that had carried her through the confrontation finally gave way to exhaustion. She exhaled slowly and ran a hand through her red hair, trying to calm the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. The slap had been a mistake. She knew that now. Phyllis had spent years trying to rebuild parts of her reputation after countless scandals, betrayals, and mistakes. One impulsive moment of anger could undo all of that progress. Worse, it might push Tessa to do exactly what Phyllis feared. Start asking questions that could lead straight to the truth before Phyllis was ready. Phyllis sat down at the nearest table and opened the folder again. The documents inside suddenly felt heavier than paper. They represented weeks of secret investigation, careful digital tracking, and quiet maneuvering. The trail of transactions she had discovered wasn't random. It was deliberate, precise, and incredibly sophisticated. Someone had been siphoning money through shell accounts that briefly touched systems connected to Newman Enterprises before disappearing again. And the scariest part was that whoever was behind it clearly understood the Newman financial structure extremely well. Too well. Phyllis had suspected several possibilities, but each one felt equally dangerous. If the thief was an insider at Newman Enterprises, exposing them could trigger a corporate war. If it was someone outside the company manipulating the system, it meant the Newman empire had vulnerabilities no one realized. Either scenario would make Victor furious. And when Victor Newman was furious, people's lives changed overnight. Phyllis closed the folder and stared toward the cafe window, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. For the first time since she began the investigation, she wondered if she had gone too far. Maybe she should have told someone sooner. Maybe she should have trusted someone else to help. But Phyllis had never been good at trusting others with sensitive information. Her instincts always pushed her to handle problems herself. That instinct had gotten her into trouble before. Across town, Tessa walked slowly through the quiet streets, her thoughts spinning. Every few steps she considered pulling out her phone to call Mariah. Normally, she would tell Mariah everything, especially something this intense. But she hesitated. Part of her wanted to believe Phyllis's explanation about the trap. Another part of her still suspected there was more to the story. Tessa stopped outside a small park bench and sat down, looking up at the deepening blue sky. The evening air carried the distant sounds of traffic and conversation, but her mind remained locked on the confrontation. She replayed the moment again, the flash of anger in Phyllis's eyes, the sudden slap, and those 6 words that had echoed with such raw warning. You should have never looked there. It hadn't sounded like a simple threat. It sounded like fear. And fear often meant the truth was even bigger than what had already been revealed. Meanwhile, back at Crimson Lights, Phyllis gathered the documents and carefully placed them back into the folder. She couldn't leave anything behind again. One mistake had already allowed Tessa to glimpse the secret. Another mistake might allow someone far more dangerous to find it. As she stood up to leave, her phone vibrated. Phyllis glanced at the screen. The number was unfamiliar. Normally she would ignore it, but something about the timing made her uneasy. After a brief hesitation, she answered. Hello. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a low voice spoke. You're digging where you shouldn't. Phyllis's entire body went still. Who is this? She demanded. But the voice continued calmly. You thought you were being clever, moving the funds around to track the trail. Phyllis's pulse began pounding in her ears. That was information no one should know. Stop now, the voice warned. Or next time, the consequences won't be a slap in a coffee shop. The line went dead. Phyllis lowered the phone slowly, her mind racing with a terrifying realization. Whoever was behind the financial scheme knew she was investigating, and they were watching her closely enough to know exactly what had happened with Tessa. Outside in the quiet evening, Tessa finally stood up from the park bench and began walking home. She had made one decision, at least for now. She wouldn't tell Mariah everything tonight. Not yet. But she also knew something else with absolute certainty. The secret she had discovered, and the violent reaction it had triggered from Phyllis, was only the beginning of a much bigger story. And before long, the truth behind that secret would start pulling more people into its orbit. In Genoa City, that usually meant one thing. A storm was coming. And when it finally broke, no one connected to the secret would escape the fallout.